Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the OWASP conference. My name is Svetlana Samko. I am volunteering in the OWASP community, Agile Technical Project Manager in Verizon Connect, developer advocate and mentor for women in tech, web development mentor, and I have a passion for security, data science, and AI. And I will be moderating this session. And during the next 45 minutes, you will be listening to project showcase of OWASP ASVS project presented by Josh Grossman. Please submit any questions you have during the session in the Q&A tab just to the right of this video in the Whova platform. I will be asking Josh questions that you submitted there in the last 10 minutes of this session. And please note the chat in Zoom is disabled, so you will not be able to add questions there, just in Whova platform. You can leave comments, you can use chat, so feel free to add them during the session. Josh has worked as a consultant in IT application security and risk for 15 years now, as well as software developer. In that time, he has seen the good, the bad, and the stuff which is sadly luckily still covered by an NDA. He is currently Chief Technology Officer for Bones Security, where he spent his time helping organizations improve and get better value from their application security processes and providing specialist application security advice. In his spare time, he co-leads the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard project and is on the OWASP Israel chapter board. Please welcome Josh, and over to you, Josh.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. I really appreciate it. And yeah, hi everyone, and welcome to my talk about the OWASP ASVS. I'm very excited to be at another global AppSec conference for OWASP. It's always a really great event and lots of really great talks. And yeah, I'm excited to be one of the first ones. So yeah, so let's dive in. So I guess in terms of who am I, first of all, I think Svetlana covered that pretty well already. Working as an application security consultant about security, consulting, training, generally, helping organizations build secure software. And in my spare time, I'm a co-leader of the OWASP ASVS project. I'm also have contributed to various other OWASP projects as well. And I'm also on the OWASP Israel chapter board. So we organize obviously our chapter meetups and also the AppSecEU conference that we've organized for the last few years. So yeah, OWASP is very much a hobby, and in particular the ASVS. So today I want to talk about a few things. I'm going to give a bit of background to ASVS, sort of talk about it in the context of some of the other OWASP projects that you may be more familiar with. Talk a little bit about what the project is, what it aims to do, how it can help. I want to talk about a few things that make it interesting. I think that it's important to pull out some of the highlights and why I think this is such an important project and why I think this is can be very beneficial for everyone who's involved in software security. I want to talk about how you can use it, how you can get involved, and contribute back to the project. And most importantly, I want to talk about the roadmap as we plan for version 5.0 that we're hoping to prepare for the end of the year, which is certainly a big important step, and hopefully you can also help contribute to that as well. So without further ado, so what is the ASVS? So it's the first question a lot of people ask, and I like to say, well, let's start off with not what is the ASVS, but what is the ASVS not? What isn't the ASVS? I think in some ways that's a good way of starting. So if we start with the OWASP top 10, the OWASP top 10 risks, this is probably the most famous OWASP project, the most well-known OWASP project. And this is a list of the top 10 bad things that could happen from an application security perspective that gets released every 3 to 4 years. And this is a really great project, really important project. It's led by a group of very well-respected experts in the field. And the most recent versions, the 2017 version, the 2021 version, they had a lot of really great feedback from the public, and they're very much developed in the open, and they used a lot of public data and they used a lot of public information to say, well, here's what we think should go into these projects. You can see it's on the GitHub repository there, and it's very frequently cited. But the important keyword here, I guess, is awareness. This is an application security awareness document. And the idea behind the project, behind the top 10, and this isn't a secret. This isn't sort of my interpretation. This is the purpose of the project. It's to spread awareness about application security issues, about web security issues. These are a set of issues that can go wrong. It is very much not designed to be a standard. We shouldn't talk about it as a standard. We shouldn't talk about, oh, we comply with the OWASP top 10, or we test according to OWASP top 10. It's meant to be an awareness document. It's not a comprehensive list. It doesn't have every single problem that we encounter from an application security perspective. It's, here are the top 10 things that we think you should be thinking about. And sometimes those things are very specific. Sometimes those things are very wide. And also another drawback that I think may make it sort of challenging to build upon is that it's very much, here are a list of 10 problems, here are a list of things you need to be worried about, that you need to be concerned about. If you dig into it, it does provide some ideas about solutions as well, but it's primarily focused around the top 10 risks, the top 10 problems. So great project for awareness, but can we use it to build secure software? Less easily. So there's also another OWASP top 10. OWASP loves top 10s, as you may have noticed. And there's another top 10 that's called the top 10 proactive controls. So this is another really great project, and its focus is slightly different though. It's more of a guidance document, and it's about pulling out sort of 10, I guess, best practices, 10 leading practices for building secure software. So we can see that these are sort of proactive, practical ways that you can build software in a secure way. These are things that we can actually do. These are things that these aren't just, oh no, what am I going to do about this problem? These are practices that we can take and apply in our development. And because of that, this is a great starting point. This is a great place to start in terms of, okay, I want to build a secure application. What do I need to think about first? What security issues do I need to think about first? And it's also a lot more practical. Like I say, it's not just a list, it's very much a document with, here's a topic and here's some narrative about that document. And that gives us the ability to say, well, okay, I'm building a software product, and here's some good practices that I can follow. Here's some good ideas that I can follow to make sure that I'm building it in a secure way, which is great. And it's much more practical for developers to take and start working with. And it also has a great team of leaders, very experienced leaders in the field who prepared the document and prepared the guidance. And yeah, I'd certainly highly recommend it as sort of a gateway into building secure software. The problem we have is that it's also not completely comprehensive. It's not designed to be a fully comprehensive application security standard. It's again more for awareness. It's more about, here are the top 10 things you might want to think about. It's not organized like a standard. It's not organized and designed in a way that, okay, we're going to follow this standard. We're going to follow this set of requirements in order to build our project or build our software. It's organized as, here's the top 10 things to think about. But what if we want to build a product, and we want to build our piece of software, and we want to have, okay, here's all the things we need to think about. Here's a sort of methodical way to think about building security into this product. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? So as you might have guessed from the title of the talk, the answer is the OWASP Application Security Verification Standard. So this is intended to be requirements for building a secure application. It's designed to be an actual standard. The idea is that you can work through this standard, you can work through the requirements of the standard and feel confident, okay, these are the requirements that I need to take into account, that I need to implement in order to build a secure application. It's structured in a way that will allow that to be done. It's not just a narrative document. It's sort of structured in a set of requirements that are relatively self-contained to allow you to say, okay, how am I going to handle this one? Okay, well, how am I going to handle this one? Much more sort of easier to digest because it's split into smaller sections. It's designed to be leading practices. The idea being that we can't release a new version of the standard every 6 months because it's a standard. It needs to stay a little bit static. It needs to, people need to be able to rely on it and not changing every 5 seconds. Because of that, we try and make sure that we're looking ahead and thinking, okay, what are we going to be good controls and good requirements and good practice, not just now, but over the next few years as well as a standard continues to be relevant. It's also developed very much in the open. Like I said early on about the OWASP top 10, it's developed in GitHub. All the issues and discussions are in GitHub. People can submit issues, people can submit feedback, people can submit pull requests with suggested content. It means we get a lot of eyes on the standard and a lot of input into what should be in the standard. To make it easier to apply, because being a standard and being comprehensive is quite large, it's split into 3 different levels. So level 1 is what we consider to be the minimum level. The idea is this should be the minimum that a company has to comply with, an application has to comply with in order to be considered to have a minimum level of security, a minimum sort of acceptable level of security. Ideally for applications that are processing less secure data or less sensitive data or are less critical, but it's an important starting point. I mean, this itself has around 130 requirements, which is a lot, but obviously each one of those is split into, each one of those is quite self-contained and quite specific. So it's not like we're having to think of a whole program just to deal with one requirement. Ideally, we should look at a requirement, figure out how we're implementing it and move on. So although there are 130 of them, each one shouldn't be too time consuming to implement. Another interesting point about it is that it should be possible to verify these requirements using penetration testing. Now, obviously, hopefully we have all sorts of different security activities going on, but generally the very minimum security activity an organization will be penetration testing, and all of these should be testable by someone who's on the outside of the application, performing tests on the application to see how it responds to certain attacks or to certain exploitation attempts. So that is a useful characteristic as well, because it means we can potentially get a very sort of basic reading. Okay, are we doing everything that should be in level 1 of the ASVS? And that's, like I say, a good starting point, and certainly an important starting point to ease into having a comprehensively secure application. But it is only the starting point, and that brings us to level 2, which is what we'd consider the standard level of security. So we would consider this as the required level for any applications that are processing sensitive data or are being relied upon for critical business functions. And that's probably going to be a large proportion of the applications that are being built. And anything that processes personal data or allows people to log in and store sensitive data is going to be included in this. It brings another set of requirements, another roughly 130 requirements, which, again, a lot of requirements, each reasonably self-contained, maybe slightly more difficult than level 1 requirements, but still perfectly achievable. But to verify these requirements is going to be a little bit more tricky. We can't just do this from someone on the outside looking in. It's going to need some inside knowledge as well, some understanding of how the application is working behind the scenes or how the processes around the application are working behind the scenes. Now, whilst on the one hand, okay, that's more difficult, that requires a more in-depth level of testing, a more in-depth level of assessment, we would argue that we need to start hybrid testing anyway. We can't just rely on external penetration testing to verify the security of an application. We'd, certainly my previous job where I was focused on security testing, we would always try and make the penetration testing as transparent as possible to get as much information about how the application was working behind the scenes in order to better target the testing and to get better coverage. And that's the sort of tests that we should be aiming for in general. And that sort of test should also be able to verify level 2 as well. So it doesn't finish there though. If there are certain applications that are particularly critical, have very high value transactions, very, very sensitive data, we would recommend considering level 3 as well, which is the advanced level. Any application that requires the highest levels of trust should be complying with this level. This level includes all of the previous requirements plus an additional 20 requirements. And it's not a huge number of extra requirements, but at the same time, these will generally be more involved, they'll be maybe more difficult to implement and generally require more work, but they are what we see as important for the most critical of applications. Again, we can want to start with level 1 as a basic. We don't want to stop there. We want to go to level 2 for any application that's going to be in any way sensitive, with level 3 being reserved for the most critical applications, the most sensitive applications. The idea being that we can ease gradually into making sure that we're complying with this standard. So who's involved in this? We've also got a great leadership team. Really proud and sort of honored to be among this group of people who steer this project. But it's not just the leaders. There's a lot of people who've contributed ideas, contributed feedback, also reviewed versions of the document at various stages, and provide lots of useful input as well. And as I said, you can be involved as well. We certainly welcome contributions and ideas from all over. And we'd be glad to hear from anyone who wants to provide their feedback or provide their ideas. And like I say, we'll look at later on at where the standard is stored. So a bit of basic information about the standard itself and how it's structured. So one of the great things about it is the standard is written in Markdown language within GitHub, which is nice because it makes it a lot easier to maintain and modify the the text of the standard, the information in the standard, but then take that basic text and export it to all sorts of different output formats depending on what your use case is. We've got scripts to generate a PDF file, a Word file, a CSV, various JSON formats. Again, whatever works best for the use that you have for the standard. But the idea is by starting off in the basic Markdown that renders nicely in GitHub and is easy to trace, then it makes for a good basis. And because it's so easy to trace and because it's a textual format, it's very easy to see sort of the evolution of the requirements and where requirements have come from, and also trace those to the point in time when the requirement was created or written or committed, and the issue where the requirement was discussed. It's just a lot easier to understand the rationale. Okay, well, where did this requirement come from in the first place? It's not just we're not just publishing a closed PDF where the provenance of the requirements and the logic behind it is all sort of hidden in some back room somewhere. Vast majority of this discussion is in GitHub, and often if you look at a requirement and think, okay, well, why is that requirement written in that way? You can search the ID and the issues and discover the discussion where what that requirement should include was discussed. And I think that's really useful for understanding the back-end context behind why certain requirements are written the way they are written. It also makes it a lot easier to translate. We currently have quite a few translations, various different languages that people have kindly taken the time to do and contribute, and that's for a variety of different versions, and information about which translations exist for which versions are on the site. But it makes it a lot easier when it's all in that textual format, that it's then easy to swap out the English with the other language that it's being translated to. One of the nice features about some of the early sections around authentication, authorization, and session management is that they're mapped to the NIST standard 863B, which is Digital Identity Guidelines, Authentication and Lifecycle Management. So NIST is an American organization, non-governmental organization that did some great work around leading practices for authentication and general authorization mechanisms, and they published a set of guidance which is very useful, very sort of well researched. It's again a bit more like a wordy document rather than a set of requirements. And as part of developing version 4, we took the concepts in that NIST document and broke them up into requirements that are then in some of the early chapters of the ASVS. That's a nice link to base off their research, but also keep it in the form of requirements that we'd like to see in the ASVS. There are various other mappings as well, which we can see on the face of the standard, including proactive controls and CWE, and there's also a cheat sheets mapping as well, which we'll see in a sec. The ASVS is designed to help comply with PCI DSS 6.5.x. We need to check where we are with the most recent version of PCI, but in general, it should help you comply with that section as well. The idea being, we want this to be the application security standard. So what does it look like? So this is a typical page from the ASVS. So we can see that up here we've got the chapter name, access control, a little bit of text about what the chapter is talking about, what's going to be, what sort of requirements are going to be in this chapter. Then each chapter is split into sections. We try to make it sort of logically numbered, X.Y.Z style numbering, so it's a lot easier to find, okay, where's this requirement, which section, which section does it relate to, which chapter is it in, just to make it easier to navigate around. So we can see we've got the section heading here, then we've got the requirements in this particular section. We can see that each of these requirements is a level 1 requirement, meaning that it's relevant for level 1, for level 2, and for level 3. If this was just a level 2 requirement, then level 1 here will be blank because it wouldn't be relevant for level 1, so it would only be relevant for level 2 and level 3. We can see CWE. CWE is Common Weakness Enumeration. It's a project from MITRE to try and categorize different security weaknesses, and that's a useful mapping to say, okay, well, I have this requirement, but what's the rationale behind this requirement? What weakness, what issue, what vulnerabilities is this requirement coming to rectify? So having that mapping there is sort of useful for that context as well. Very subtly down here, we can see a link to the OWASP proactive controls item that this requirement relates to. It's just a nice way of mapping across, saying, okay, well, if I'm already dealing with the proactive controls, which ASVS items should I already be handling, which ASVS items should I already be have solved. You may be able to use that as sort of an initial stage to say, okay, well, if I want to start off with the ASVS and I can't do all 130 items in level 1, where can I start? And it may be that you can use the items that are mapped to the proactive controls as a guiding point to say, well, these are the top 10 proactive controls, so they, that means there's a certain level of importance attached to them, so maybe I want to start there. But that's not necessarily an official position, but it's something to think about if you're, again, looking at how to get to that first stage of how do I achieve level 1? Where do I start? So the standard is split into a set of chapters, and as you can see, this is quite comprehensive. Various different areas covering various different chapters covering various different areas of security, sort of all the things that you'd expect to see from a comprehensive application security standard. And again, each of these has sections and requirements within the sections related to that particular area. Ultimately, all of these chapters should be important for your application. It may be there are certain requirements that are out of scope in your particular situation for whatever reason, but certainly as a starting point, you need to assume that all of the chapters are going to be relevant for you. So if you've got an API that you've written, just because there's a chapter called API Web Service doesn't mean you don't have to look at everything else. API may give you certain additional requirements you need to take into account, but ultimately all of the chapters should be relevant, and all of the chapters have to be considered for securing the application. So when I'm giving a talk about the ASVS, I deliberately don't want to start talking about, okay, here's this standard, here's what's in this, here's this chapter, here's what's in this chapter, and go through all the requirements. There are a lot of requirements, as we know, and it doesn't make it for super interesting. So what I like to do is try and say, okay, well, let's just pull out a few interesting examples. Like I say, OWASP loves its top 10s. So I sometimes talk about the OWASP ASVS top 10 cool features. But on this occasion, because I want to make sure I save some time for the future as well, I'm going to restrict myself to the OWASP top 5 cool features. So here are a set of things that I think are interesting about the ASVS and sort of demonstrate why it's an important project. So SSRF is a type of vulnerability that has been very prevalent over the last few years. Now, back in 2017, they released an updated version of the OWASP top 10, and within 2018, 2019, 2020, we were already seeing widespread exploitation of issues related to server-side request forgery. But partially because it wasn't in the OWASP top 10, it didn't have the prominence, it didn't have the awareness that other, maybe older and better known vulnerabilities had. And in fact, there was discussion about whether there needed to be some sort of point release of the OWASP top 10, some sort of interim release of the OWASP top 10 to highlight the importance of SSRF. Now in ASVS, because we've been designed to begin with to be a comprehensive standard, we had that in to begin with. We have already had that in. We had various different requirements related to SSRF to make sure that you were thinking about this issue and thinking about how you're going to deal with this issue. We didn't have to wait for another version of the OWASP top 10 to come out, which I think in 2021 the SSRF was going to be more significantly highlighted. We didn't have to wait for that though, because we were a comprehensive standard. We could have all of the different issues in. We weren't just restricted to having a top 10. And that means that anyone who's following the ASVS should have been aware of this issue and should have been able to combat this issue. And that's a big plus of being a standard like this. We didn't need to fit ourselves into a particular template or a particular time frame. And also, whilst the standard maintains, also maintains static versions of the standard, I guess the bleeding edge version is always being updated with new comments and new information. And if you don't need to strictly comply to a standard, but you want to see, okay, what's most up to date today, you can also use that, and that's always there on the master branch of the GitHub repository. So the big advantage of having this comprehensive standard and this ongoing development of the standard. So we've tried to bring in sort of specifically useful practices that we see that deal with very sort of well-known real-life threats. So the idea of password reuse and password stuffing has been a major issue over the last few years. The idea that an organization will get breached and a list of known username and password combinations will get disclosed, either hashed or not hashed, and then attackers will start performing a credential stuffing attack where they start trying to use these breached usernames and passwords on other services as well to see whether they can get these valid credentials to work on other services as well. So because of this, we wanted to make sure that there was some sort of requirement that would cover this issue. And so we require that organizations are looking at, not looking at passwords, literally, obviously, they don't want anyone to be looking at the password, but that the system is checking that the passwords aren't commonly used passwords, or potentially warning if a password has been seen in a previous breach, because this is the main indicator that an account may get breached in your application is if someone's reused a password from a different application. So we try to make sure that we're having these sort of useful practical requirements that actually deal with real life impact. And again, it's very much about making sure this is a usable standard that provides proactive leading practices. So certainly when I first had a look at the standard, I was familiar with the first 3 items on this slide, with the secure flag, the HTTP only flag. The same site flag is a little bit newer, but also quite well known. But I hadn't heard of the host prefix. That was new to me when I first started the ASVS. But that's something that's been included since version 4. And in fact, the idea behind the host prefix is that it's, if you name a cookie with this particular prefix, you call it a name that starts off with this __ host hyphen, then the browser will specifically configure the cookie in the most secure possible way. So regardless of what other attributes you specified or what other configuration you specify for that cookie, the browser will immediately know, okay, because it has this prefix, I need to protect this cookie in a particular way without having to manually set all those different configurations. And that's something that's still at, in theory, it's still at the RFC stage, but in practice, it's shipping in pretty much every single browser already. And it's an example, again, of sort of forward-looking leading practice about that, what is a good protection that we can recommend today, and maybe is less well known, but will improve the overall security of an application and organization. So even though this is less well known, we chose this to include as something that we could see as being a worthy and well-used control, a well-used control and a well-supported control. Again, it means by having this level of granularity and having this level of comprehensiveness, we can make specific recommendations to build a more secure application. So, obviously we want to deal with the I guess, the most well-known and the most risky issues and the most sort of widespread exploited issues, but we also want to think about the edge cases as well. We don't just want to think about, well, here are the top 10 issues, here are the top 20 issues, here are, you know, what the most well-known issues. We want to think about slightly more unusual issues as well, but that can still have a significant security impact on the application. So this particular control about abnormal behavior. If you imagine someone working, let's say, in a call center, and their job is that customers will phone them up and they will look at the customer's record and they will help them out, or they'll give them advice, or they'll make changes to the customer's record, and yeah, that's their job. You know, maybe they can expect to have, let's say, 10 calls an hour. So if they get 10 calls an hour, they're probably looking at 10 customers an hour. And they're opening up 10 customer records, and they may be exposed to sensitive data for that customer, but ultimately, you know, that's their job. Their job is to see the customer's sensitive data and help them, you know, modify their records or perform actions on their behalf. But what if that call center operator is accessing 20 records an hour, 30, 50, 100, 1,000, 10,000 an hour? Now, in theory, they have permissions to do that. They have authorization to do that. That's theoretically, it's their job to view customer records, but certainly not at that volume in that period of time. You know, that's clearly not within business expectations for that person to be doing. And you know, that's a sort of subtlety you can't necessarily capture with a top 10 or with a, okay, we're just going to focus on the most well-known issues. But it is an important part of the security of the application. You know, what's happening here is there's some sort of malicious software on the customer service agent's machine that is pulling data out of the application, or is the customer service operators themselves doing something they shouldn't be doing, or using some sort of automated script to pull out a lot of customer information. Yeah, that sort of information that's the sort of issue that is important for an organization to know about. But again, it requires this subtle understanding of what is expected, what's considered normal for the application. And the nice thing about having a comprehensive standard is that we can go into that level of granularity and go into that level of thought. So the fifth thing I want to pick up before I move on. So a lot of the requirements are saying you must do this, you must do that, you must do the other. And you know, that's great. But you know, we want to try and keep the requirements short. We can't necessarily say exactly how you should do something, but we didn't want to just leave it as do this, but not say how to do that. So we've tried wherever possible to sort of include guidance and include ideas about, well, if you want to do this, then here's a way you can do it. So for example, this part of chapter 9, where we talk about configuring transport layer security securely, we reference a great tool from Mozilla that allows creating secure configurations. It gives you a whole list of, you know, what web server you're using, what technology you're using, what level of configuration you want. It lets you generate a configuration file for that particular server software that will be a secure configuration file. So it's not just about what you have to do, but it also starts giving you a pointer of how you should do it. And that's something that we've tried to do wherever we can. And in particular, the OWASP cheat sheets project, which is another really great OWASP project you should certainly be aware of, which contains detailed information about how to perform certain security activities or do certain features in a secure way. So for the cheat sheets project, there's a mapping between ASVS and the cheat sheets project that says for this section of ASVS, what cheat sheets might be useful to you in order to carry this out. And certainly, you know, especially where we see that, you know, leading practice can change and be more dynamic in certain cases, we may say, well, you know, you need to carry this out according to current leading practice, where current leading practice might be what is currently in the cheat sheet. So this is another great resource for not just what to do, but also how to do it. So how can I use it? I guess, you know, practical real world use. I mean, at the moment we've seen ASVS in lots of different contexts. A lot of organizations are using it internally to drive their security application security processes and to drive their security application security assessments. We're particularly seeing an uptake in public sector organizations and governmental organizations, or, you know, government itself, to look at, you know, building regulation around it and building into their overall regulations for building secure software. And we're certainly seeing a lot of take up and a lot of interest in that. And the direction we're also seeing is that not just individual organizations, but the ASVS will hopefully start to be used to as a benchmark for entire ecosystems of applications or entire ecosystems of products to say, well, if you want to be in this ecosystem, you need to comply with the relevant requirements from ASVS. And that's a really great direction to perform a much wider, or get a much wider level of assurance over a wide set of applications. And then there are certain organizations that are in a position to enforce that level of comprehensiveness and enforce that level of security across a wide range of applications. And it's certainly a great trend. And I'm hoping that soon we'll be able to talk about a particular partnership we have in that area that is hopefully going to lead to a wide level of security for a wider range of applications. I mean, in terms of specific, what can we use it for? So it fits a wide range of different activities in the SDLC and the software development lifecycle. Maybe it's for either developing security requirements or developing requirements which are secure. It can be used to think about, well, how do I want to design a feature to work in a secure way? So what considerations do I need to take into account? It can help for implementation. It can help for the practical, how should I do this particular function? How should I, what algorithm should I use for this particular function? So it certainly doesn't replace your SDLC. It can't tell you how to build a secure software development lifecycle, but it can be used in certain activities to provide valuable guidance, valuable input into, okay, well, how should I do this? What do I need to think about here? Another possible area is procurement. And that may be trying to make sure that third-party products that you're bringing into your environment or that you're using are following a security standard, they're following an application security standard, they're being built in a secure way. Another interesting way that it could be used in procurement is if you're buying a security product or you're buying a security service and you want to understand, well, which of these requirements is this security product helping me to comply with? If this is a web application firewall, which of the ASVS requirements can it help with? Which will it be able to enforce? That's also a useful way of comparing between different products and also understanding, well, what extra security is this bringing me? And finally, like I said earlier, it can be used in an assessment. It can be used as a framework for penetration testing, and also be used to think about QA as well. If QA are trying to think, well, how am I going to make sure that this new feature that's been deployed is secure? It can be used as a way of thinking, well, I might want to think about this item or this item or this requirement and making sure this requirement is the case. So there are quite a wide range of ways we can use this, and wide range of context that we can use this in. So what's a long-term plan? What I've been speaking about up until now is how the standard is in version 4.0. But right now, we're looking ahead. We're looking to version 5. We recently released the roadmap for version 5, which includes both a timeline and also our principles, our aims, what we want to see in version 5. So firstly, in terms of timescales, we are hoping to release version 5 by the end of the year. It's quite an aggressive timescale. There's a lot to do, but we're hoping that we can push that forward. The most recent version was released in early 2019. The version 4.0, or most recent major version 4.0.x, was released in 2019, and we feel like now is the time to get an updated version out. So the idea is that we'll discuss the current GitHub comments over the next couple of months. We, in theory, said that we're going to close for new comments, but we'll certainly review new comments on a best efforts basis. So if you start looking through now and you have key feedback, then do open a comment and we will try and get to those as well. The idea is that over the course of August to October, we'll start writing the draft for 5.0 based on the 4.0 text, but obviously there'll be a lot of things that are moved around and are generally tidied up, and obviously incorporating the results of the discussions from the open comments. We've left 3 months for that because we too need to have holidays, and again, it's a big undertaking. And then the idea is that November, December, we should get comments on a draft of version 5.0 with names and then releasing at the end of the year. So for 5.0, our key principles are: we want to make it easier to use. We want to make the standard even easier than it is at the moment. We want to lower the barrier to entry. And that involves clarifying existing requirements and making sure that It's clear from each requirement what exactly needs to be happen, maybe reorganizing based on feedback, and generally making sure that it's as easy as possible to understand the requirements that are there. We've had minor versions since version 4, but we've always avoided changing the meaning too much of requirements because we don't want to break things across minor versions. But with 5.0, we can break things if we feel it's necessary to increase the clarity of the requirements and increase the understandability of the standard. We also want to enhance the explanations on how the levels are split, how they work, and potentially reduce the barrier to entry, maybe make level 1 easier to achieve, because the important thing is that an organization can get started and they can get to the first level. And once they get to the first level, it's going to be easier for subsequent levels as well. We want to make that as easy as possible to achieve without compromising security. And there's a fine balance there, but to a certain extent, we'd rather have, we'd rather compromise slightly on, okay, this is the very minimum level of security, if it means that a lot more organizations will take the standard and use the standard more widely and work more closely with it. The mappings, there are various different mappings. We're considering moving those to a sort of a different part of the repository, just making them slightly less in your face, because we want the requirements to be front and center. We want what you need to do straight away to be the most clear thing on the standard. And as part of that, we also want to streamline the document and make sure that it's as easy as possible to start using a document, start understanding the document. At the moment, there's a lot of surrounding text, a lot of introduction text, a lot of explanations, and we're not sure how much people are using that and how much they're just looking at the requirements. And we may want to try and prioritize, or I guess emphasize requirements over the explanatory text, because that's the crux of what organizations need to follow. So that's the plan 5.0. And the question is, well, how can you be involved in this? So first of all, use the standard. The most recent stable version is 4.0.3. That's all on the GitHub repository. You can find that as well as various different output formats of that version on the 4.0.3 tree, and it should also be the contents of the 4.0 directory in the master as well. But if you want to be sure, you can use that tree, and that tree is stuck to version 4.0.3 and isn't being affected by any ongoing discussions or ongoing work towards 5.0. If you want to see the in-progress version, which is sort of constantly changing, constantly being modified in the run up to version 5, then you can see that in that in the master branch and the 5.0 directory. Obviously, bear in mind that's a moving target, that's going to keep changing, but if you want the most up-to-date guidance, that's the best place to find it. There's also various different presentations about ASVS that you can use to communicate, spread the good word, and talk to your own organizations about ASVS. Thanks to Andrew van der Stok, who created the basis for this in the beginning.
Thanks, Emil and Josh. That's perfect.
Okay. Just a couple more slides. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. Of course, we will have a few questions just to be conscious of time, so we have at least 2-3 questions for you. So
okay, so just a couple more slides and we'll go to questions, if that's okay. Okay. So yeah, don't just use the standard, contribute your ideas as well, provide your feedback, and there's guidance on contributing at the link here. You can also provide translations and also talk about how you're using it and give your feedback on how you're using it. You can also support the standard. We now have a supporters program. We're very grateful to One Consult, who are supporting ASVS as a tertiary supporter, and Apiro, who are supporting us as an associate supporter. And you can support the project as part of your OWASP corporate membership or directly. There are also primary and secondary support levels, and that's would greatly help us to spend more time on the project and generally increase the awareness of the project. And as a final point, I'd like to thank our maintaining supporters, who are organizations that let the project leaders work on the organization time to keep the project moving and to make sure that we can achieve what we want to achieve with the project. So thank you very much to Clarified Security, Bounce Security, and Manacode for their support on that. So that's the ASVS. Thank you very much for your time today. I hope that's been a useful overview that helped you understand both what's the current state is and also what the future plans are. If you have questions, feedback, information, you want to speak to me, you want to get involved with the project, there are a lot of links here that will hopefully help you for that. And yeah, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Josh. That was an amazing presentation and a lot of information. So that's why we have questions. And first question for you. With agile and fast-paced development, what would be the recommended re-verification period for a single application? Would it be better for ASVS to also have a set of definitions of done per section based on the requirements, so those can be included easily in user stories?
So that's a good question. I know that ultimately the requirements are written in a way that you should be able to read the requirement and then understand what's needed to actually comply with that requirement and what you should expect to see if that requirement's being complied with. What we may have in the near future is an additional guide for the ASVS that's more like a testing guide to say, well, if you want to verify that this requirement is being satisfied or this set of requirements is being satisfied, here are specific tests you can carry out to verify this. Now, this is, there's already an OWASP project, which is the web app security testing guide, but that's written, it's sort of not written in terms of verifying against the ASVS. It's more of a general sort of penetration testing guidance document, and the idea is to have a guide that's part of the ASVS that gives more specific tests structured based on the ASVS for how to verify that particular requirements are being satisfied, and that could be potentially used as a definition of done for a particular requirement by saying, well, if we carry out this test, is it passing successfully? Can we see this requirement has been successfully complied with? So I hope that answers the question. If it hasn't done them, please feel free to follow up or get in touch with me afterwards.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Josh. Another question is, so is this like CIS benchmarks, but for code?
Is this like CIS benchmarks, but for code?
Yeah.
Trying to give a long or a short answer. I'm going to start off with a minor dig at CIS. If you want to use CIS benchmarks, you're limited in how you can use those. And there's sort of certain licensing agreements around that, and you can only use them in certain contexts, whereas the ASVS is freely licensed. Anyone can take it, anyone can use it, anyone can fork it with attribution, and you can do what you need to do. So it's a lot more flexible from that perspective. Other than that, it is along the same sort of lines. The idea is you should be able to verify particular characteristics of the software. CIS benchmarks tend to be very sort of configuration focused and very sort of focused on a particular technology, and that lets them be a little, that makes it a little bit easier to sort of, okay, is this value set, is this value set, is this value set? In a configuration file, for example, it makes it a lot easier to automate. ASVS is a little bit more general because it's trying to look at the application as a whole, so it's not quite as clean to verify that particular requirement is being correctly carried out. Like I said, the testing guide will hopefully help with that. And there's been some work to say, well, for some of these requirements, we're going to create some sort of automation that can verify these requirements automatically. But it's not necessarily straightforward for every requirement. But certainly in terms of the principle of, here's the security things you should, the requirements you'd expect to see from a piece of software, and here are the things you're going to want to verify. It certainly does have a similar approach to the CIS benchmark.
Thank you very much. Another question, how can companies get certified against the ASVS?
Yes, so this is a question I get asked a lot. And it's a tricky question. There is no ASVS certification. This isn't like ISO or SOC 2. You don't get a pretty document at the end or some sort of magic certificate. So it's not quite that straightforward. I think that the easiest way I've seen is if you already have penetration testing being performed, if you can ask your tester if they can structure the test in such a way they can give you feedback on how the application performs based on the requirements of the ASVS. It does require a little bit more work, but it can give you a slightly, a penetration testing report will usually be, this was bad, this was bad, this was bad, this was bad. And if we can replace that with a report saying, well, we didn't find any issues in this requirement area, we didn't find any issues with this requirement area, we didn't find any issues, or we did find an issue with this requirement because this, we were able to do this. And that gives you a far more comprehensive picture of how the application is doing. So that's one possibility. And it's possible that consultancies might start offering some sort of informal review against the ASVS, but there isn't an official process at the moment. But it may be possible to work with a security consultancy to find a way of incorporating the ASVS into a review.
Thank you for the answer. And if I would like to get more in-depth information about using ASVS, what should I do? Where can I get this information?
Yeah, so I try and cover as much as possible here, and I think there can be a lot of valuable information from just reading through the standard and sort of trying to understand the requirements, and feeling free to ask questions. The Slack channel is quite active, and we try and be active on the GitHub repository as well, although Slack is probably more responsive in terms of simple questions. Other than that, I also deliver training sort of more in depth about using the ASVS, sort of things that can't be covered in a short training at a short conference session like this. I do also have training that covers on a wider basis how to use ASVS, how to take how to get an application security mindset, how to build security requirements, and then use the ASVS as a guide for that. And but that's obviously something that's a lot more involved, and if that's something that you're interested in and you want to do some more in-depth training on that, then you can be in contact with me, and we can see what we can do.
Thank you very much. Anything else you would like to add, Josh, at the end of your session? So we don't have any more questions, but maybe anything else on the OWASP ASVS?
No, I just want to reinforce the key messages that number one, please do start using this. Do start trying to integrate this into your overall assessment and sort of development processes. It's certainly I think there's another standard that's specifically focused on applications that's like this, and I think we're going to see more take up of this standard, certainly from a regulatory perspective as we go forward. So certainly getting ahead of that and starting to get sort of in the loop and start using it is going to be of a big benefit to any organization. And yeah, please be involved as well. Feel free to be involved in the GitHub repository and give your feedback, and give your ideas, and ask questions. We very much welcome community feedback to try and make sure that the standard fits well for everyone and makes sense for everyone, and yeah, generally keep it as the high quality standard that it is today. So yeah, and thanks very much everyone for joining today. I appreciate it, and thanks for moderating, Svetlana. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Josh. I just wanted to ask, how big is now the community? How many people all over the world in your community, or maybe just if you're talking about your country?
That's a good question. So we do have a list of contributors, which we sort of update with each minor release, and certainly we've had probably, I don't know the exact numbers, something like 50 to 100 people who've had some contribution within the standard, whether that be review or submitting suggested wording, and then probably another 10 or so who've made major contributions and have done either a lot of review or provided a lot of content on top of the leaders. So it's certainly a large group of people, and that doesn't count people who just sort of ask questions or raised issues in issues section, but never actually, either we sort of committed to look at the feedback directly, or it got discussed without actions being taken. But certainly we always welcome more interest and more feedback as well.
And during COVID, did you have online sessions, regular online sessions with your community, or how did it work with the community?
So in terms of interacting with the community, it's mostly there's no sort of formal process for ongoing meetings or ongoing discussions. It's more the asynchronous discussions in the GitHub repository. And that's really between the GitHub repository and the Slack channel. That's the main venue for discussions on ASVS, and it's very much done in an async basis. I guess we could look at doing town hall meetings or wider focus group meetings if necessary, but ultimately having the sort of the asynchronous approach and using the chat and using the issues, I think it helps to give people time to read through the thoughts and provide their own thoughts, and that's a wide range of people contribute. So that seems to work quite well.
Thanks. That was amazing. I think people found a lot of answers during your session, and if you will need to contact Josh, please contact. Please be the active part of community. And thank you very much for your questions and for your great presentation.